I would like to introduce Srinivas Adipali first. And on his resume, he has the most powerful three-letter acronym in this country that can offer. I'm not referring to the BJP or the TMC, but honestly, I am Ahmedabad. He's an alum of I am Ahmedabad. He's the founder and CEO of GlobalGyan Academy of Management. He's a former Chief Strategy Officer of Tata Communications. He's a visiting faculty at I am Ahmedabad, I am Indore, and many other places. He was 40 under 40 most exciting leaders of the telecom industry. Now, I can go on, but in the interest of time, I will keep silent. Now, the second person we have is a very interesting gentleman, Sudhir Sitapati. I think he is Srinivas's good friend from B School. He also has the three most powerful letters on his resume, I am Ahmedabad. He also has another very powerful three-letter acronym on his resume, which is HUL, Unilever. So the next time all of you have issues with Knorr, Brew, Lipton, Taj Mahal, or Kisan Jam, you know whom to reach out to. But he is the author of the CEO Factory, Management Lessons of Unilever. They say that if you work 2 years in levers, you will end up becoming a CEO at some point in your life. So on that note, I'd like to request Srinivas to take this discussion forward. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, Sandeep.
Thanks, Sandeep. I think you kind of made us feel a little embarrassed as we began this conversation. It's difficult to speak, but I'm really happy to have this conversation with Sudhir as my good friend. Of course, we are meeting after a long time because of COVID. And the good news since we probably met last is the book that you published. A dream that many of us have, that someday we'll publish a book. You did it at a very quick pace. And the book, The CEO Factory, really talks about how for years, for decades, Hindustan Lever, as I still know it in my mind, HLL, and now HUL, Hindustan Unilever, has not only outperformed the market for years and decades altogether, but also has contributed to some of the top CEOs and CXOs of Indian industry. Right? So could you just maybe quickly tell us what are the secrets of Hindustan Levers that ensures that you outperform the market and create CEOs not just for your own company, but for pretty much all major companies in the country?
Thanks, Srini. I'm going to call him Kisan because that was his DOM name and I can't refer to him as anything else but Kisan. So when I say Kisan, I'm really referring to Srini. So, Kisan, the thing is, HUL is a company that's been around for a long time. It's been around in India for about 80 years. And it's a relatively rare company that, in the 1950s, it was a top 5 company in India. And in 2020, in terms of market cap, it's a top 5 company in India. In 1986, when the Sensex was founded, it was a top 5 company in India. So it's been the proverbial tortoise and the hare race where, every decade you always have a superstar company coming up. But HUL is the, sort of company that continues to motor on and then pretty much is the only company that, lives for this long. Though it never has spectacular performances, it always has very good performances, and very good performances over a very long period of time ends up being spectacular. And, as I write in the book, and the CEO thing is quite well known, I think there are 3 or 4 things that make HUL both a CEO factory and successful over a long time. And I'm going to end with what we're going to discuss. One of it is, it's a strong meritocracy. The second one is, it's a lot of the HUL people really start off at ground level, as I call it, from Lakhimpur to London. So everybody sort of beats the market in the beginning. I mean, the third thing is that, it's got a strong middle class value, frugality, recruits people from the middle classes and sort of grows with them. And the fourth is, it's got a strong value system. A lot of, financial analysts will tell you that one of the reasons that HUL gets the kind of premium it is, it's called an integrity premium, which, analysts genuinely believe that what they hear from HUL is the truth and nothing but the truth. But the fifth thing, which is a really interesting thing, which, my former boss, Gopal Vittal, told me when I was interviewing a lot of people on what makes HUL successful over such a long period of time. And he said, it's got a culture of an entrepreneur professional. He said it's a rare thing because, he's now in Airtel and he's seen many companies. It's very rare to have both strong professional outlook, but also to have a strong sense of ownership and entrepreneurship. And he felt that, on the cake of these 4 attributes, this 5th attribute of entrepreneur professional has what has been keeping HUL going for such a long time. And I kind of end there on what's different about HUL.
thanks for sharing that. I think each of the topics that you talked about could, obviously have a chapter in your book and deserve an hour-long conversation each. But let's pick the one that I think intrigues us the most, which is this almost oxymoron of professional entrepreneur. We are seeing a lot of this hype, I would say, partly about entrepreneurship, and everyone wants to quit well-paying jobs in the corporate world and after college. So there's a lot of noise and news about entrepreneurship, but in the same environment, Unilever has ensured that a lot of its professionals have continued, and they behave entrepreneurially within the organization. So, could you just give us maybe two examples or two things that ensure that a corporate, and it obviously Unilever has done it, but there could be others who can try to do something similar, which ensure that the ownership that you see in entrepreneurship, and in some ways the agility that you see in entrepreneurship, how are you able to maintain both within the construct of a corporate?
Yeah. No, Kisan, I'll answer the questions quickly. I'll give you one example of entrepreneurship. There are plenty of examples of entrepreneurship of HUL. Since you said, give me an example, and then I'll tell you why I think this has happened, right? Why do, and I don't think HUL is the only company, by the way. I think there are 4 or 5 companies in India which are entrepreneur professionals, and I think they all share common traits. I mean, Tata's is one of them for certain. I think, in the early 1990s, the excise duty on personal products was 130%. And the HUL chairman at that time and the HUL legal director, M.K. Sharma, who was recently chairman of ICICI Bank, spent a lot of time, convincing the government that if they reduced excise duty on personal products, consumption would go up and overall tax revenues would go up. Now, this is not the kind of thing that multinationals do in big in countries that they operate in. Usually they're followers, and it was really unique that many of what we see in liberalization that happened in the 1990s was consensus. But HUL certainly played a very crucial role on why reduction in taxes, when we had evidence from all over the world. So MK will tell you, and a lot of people in government know it, that Mr. MK Sharma was very active in this tax thinking. And there's an example. There are plenty of examples of entrepreneurship. Most recently, we bought Horlicks, and Unilever is not in the nutrition business anywhere, and we paid 40,000 crores to buy Horlicks, which is again an act of entrepreneurship. So these are a couple of examples of big entrepreneurship, and they're game changing. One or two of them. I think there are two things about entrepreneurship which I think are characteristics of HUL and a few companies that have it. One is, big companies, a majority of people in big companies have to be process oriented guys, because that's how big companies run. But a small minority have to be mavericks. Now, what happens in many big companies is early on mavericks get pushed down. The system doesn't allow mavericks to thrive and survive. I think HUL, because of its management training system and its general philosophy of a more empathetic meritocracy, we don't differentiate that much for the first 7-8 years of a person's career. Now, that seems a lot for a youngster joining us, but that's one of our philosophies. That 7-8 years, let the guy blossom. Don't judge her or him too quickly. And what happens then is that some of these mavericks then are able to go to 7-8 years when they come to middle and senior management, and then they're able to make a difference. And I think in many companies, mavericks get squeezed out early. I think that's one kind of thing that I think HUL does. The second thing which I think some companies have is, what is entrepreneurship at the end of the day, right? It's ownership. Why is an entrepreneur entrepreneurial? Because he or she feels that they own the company. And I think that some of the HR practices in HUL, and most famously the management training program, where everyone really goes to the boondocks and has a really rough time in the beginning of their career, basically ensures that there's a very, very high degree of ownership. And there's a in levers we say you can take a person out of Hindustan Lever, but you can't take Hindustan Lever out of the person. And however old, I interviewed so many people. The oldest person I interviewed joined the company in the 40s. And I interviewed people who left the company, but they all still refer to HLL or HUL as we. So that sense of ownership is the differentiation for entrepreneurship. It's not capital. Capital is one way of getting ownership, but to have a feeling of a tribe, I think is the other thing that HUL and a few other companies across India seem to have done better than others. And that sort of guarantees success over a long period of time.
Yeah, and I can totally relate to that, because the same thing is said for those who work in the Tata group, that you can leave the Tata Group, but the Tata Group doesn't leave you. And I personally have had that experience since I left 7 years ago. And one of the things that I think I really like the point that you made about if you can make them believe that they have ownership, even if they don't necessarily have ownership from a stock perspective, but how do you build ownership through actions, through decision making? I think that's really crucial. And there's one where I was reading your book and rereading it again, I caught on to one very interesting thing. You mentioned about this township that was built by Lever brothers when they created levers in the initial years. I think it was in 1888 or something. They created Port Sunlight, and you also mentioned in your book that Jamshedji Tata probably got inspired to think about Jamshedpur in a similar way. And I felt that had some resonance to why people take ownership. So could you just think about, does a factory township or does having a city of your own, how does that play a role in creating ownership?
Yeah, no, and I think that's a really interesting point you make on Tatas and Levers, and they are a bit joined at the hip culturally, because I do know that Port Sunlight was the first industrial township, and Jamshedji Tata did take inspiration. They were built in the 1870s, and Jamshedpur, Tata Nagar later. I think that having if you speak to people who worked in Tisco or Tata Steel, the kind of feeling that they have even within the Tatas, you'll find that those who've lived in Jamshedpur and Tatas really feel that it's a family and a home. And again, coming back to ownership, and William Lever did that. He built a home for every one of his workers. He allowed them he used to organize balls for them, swimming contests. It was one big family. And of course, we don't do that nowadays, because, we all think of different business models, but it's important for us to think of the underlying principles, which is, and it's a very important principle. If a company is home, you feel like it's your home. Even if you don't own shares in the company, you have ownership of the company. I mean, in those days, it was a physical home. And I think as we think about COVID and, circumstances now and everything has become virtual, in terms of management, we still need to think about how do employees feel that their company is their second home. And I think both Tatas and Levers, have had longevity. You can't deny the fact that they've been successful for a very long time, whatever the ups and downs. And certainly some of their roots are in this kind of paternal capitalism, for lack of a better word.
And you mentioned COVID times, and when in fact offices are being shut down, there are many companies saying that we will shut all our offices forever and people can only work from home. Do you think that's going to help in building the culture that we're talking about? If you said everyone work from home wherever you are forever, what do you have to say to that?
See, I mean, Kisan, it's hard for me to give a prognosis on the future and how things will happen. But I do think that however we design the new organization, because I think COVID will end up with a new organization, right? And ultimately, organizations get driven a lot by cost structures, and we can see a cheaper way of running organizations than we were running earlier on. We mustn't forget the softer element, the element of collaboration, the element of team playing, people together. And I guess companies, they have to balance this. So you can use the new virtual medium, you can use it for its efficiencies, but you shouldn't forget what Jamshedji Tata or Lord Leverhulme did in building a culture, because this is what has lasted for a long time. So it's hard for me to specifically say what we should do, but I think the general point is we shouldn't forget we should forget this family feeling. I think it's a really understated feeling in modern management, and I mean, and I feel that many of the winners, we just saw HDFC, Mr. Puri retired recently, and lots of articles. He's a classic example of an entrepreneur professional, and he sort of built that kind of culture. It's a pretty old world culture, HDFC, in that sort of sense, and I think companies shouldn't forget that. Even startups who are building great institutions in the future cannot just make these.
Yeah, and I think the point that you're making about not going the extreme way of becoming only virtual, and I know for a fact that even in my own organization, one of the feedback has been loss of energy and just the feeling of being team players. Sudhir, I'm also looking at some questions that have been posted. So while we have our conversation going on, I'll just interject with one or two questions. I think there's an interesting question that, now say we are talking about this professional entrepreneurial behavior within the corporate, but is there a record of them becoming real entrepreneurs? So the question says HUL and Tata's don't have a good record of their
Yeah, no, sorry, Kisan. I think I lost you for 20 seconds, but I heard the question, which is HUL and Tata. Look, the thing is, I don't know about the Tatas in particular. HUL, has a record of entrepreneurs. There are plenty of them who are entrepreneurs who are there. I mean, Nirmal Jain was from HUL. I mean, Mama Go, Varun Alag, who's a recent guy from HUL. There are plenty of guys are there. But having said that, I would still say that that is not the core function of HUL. I mean, HUL is not an entrepreneur factory. It is a CEO factory, right? And I would say that, I mean, and that organization that generates entrepreneurs.
I think, okay, I think we are back.
Yeah, no, sorry, I'm just having a little bit of ups and downs. And look, that's no good or bad thing. I think, there's a huge amount of value to be created among companies which are entrepreneur professionally. I mean, you take the top 5-10 companies in India today, many of them are professional. Most of them are professional companies. So there's tremendous value to be created for society through having entrepreneurship professionals. There's also tremendous value to be created through entrepreneurs. Some of these big companies don't have, right or wrong, that kind of record in entrepreneurship. In fact, very few companies have record of entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship is a bit of a random thing where guys are coming from all over the place. I would say Tata's and Levers has the same random distribution of it on the entrepreneur front.
So this thing about building enterprises, right? So which is really what ultimately, whether you're a startup that has just started off or you're a corporate, the goal of all businesses ought to be to create value for their customers, employees, and obviously for shareholders, and that can only happen through longevity of the business. You can't be a flash in the pan to create true value, and I think somewhere that message is being lost, and probably the professional entrepreneur idea is reinforcing that we need to also think about long-term purpose and longevity of business ideas before we just focus on short-term success. So the great thing about CEOs and producing future CEOs is that you're enabling people to straddle between these two, having a purpose, having long-term vision, and at the same time being able to deliver short-term success, because you have to compete and fight in the market. How does HUL work with its managers to make sure that they can achieve both, that they build both mindsets?
See, I'll tell you actually, it's an interesting question on the history of the company, and I think it's worth spending a minute, like, Tata's, and maybe Kisan, at some point we should also, ask you the question on Tata's and how it's created an entrepreneur professional culture. But you see, the Unilever HUL is an amalgamation of 3 different cultures. There's an English culture, a Dutch culture, and an Indian culture. The English culture is where a lot of the social conscience and also the marketing expertise comes from. What is not very well known about Unilever is the Dutch culture is where very strong integrity, process, and professionalism comes from. That's a very strong cultural aspect of the Dutch. I think what happened in Unilever is in the 1950s, well before other Unilever decided a policy called "ization" in 1958, where they started big countries being allowed to run by local managers. So those of you who are a little older in this group will remember a gentleman called P.L. Tandon, who was a very famous man in those days. He was the first professional chairman of Indian chairman of Hindustan Unilever. And I think because HUL allowed Indian chairman to run the company well in advance of many of the metal boxes of the world and many of the British companies that came on, those Indian chairmen who came from Indian conditions felt that they owned the company and they owed it to success. And ultimately culture is a virtuous cycle, Kisan. So once P.L. Tandon sets a culture of we own this company and we got to prove ourselves, generations, it just becomes self-reinforcing. So in a sense, I would answer like many old companies, an old and successful companies, some of their answers lie in their history, and this is this unique culture of HUL, and also this autonomy that Unilever gave it in the 1950s, well before anyone anywhere in the world did it. I mean, Citibank and Unilever, in some sense, are very unique companies globally, where very early on local managers were given autonomy. And that's probably the reason why this sort of perpetuates in HUL today.
Yeah, and I think that's true, Sudhir, that the same probably works for the Tata Group in a way that any employee who joined a Tata Group company, when they looked at who their CEO was, it was not somebody from a family. It was someone like them who joined maybe as a GET or a management trainee and just grew to be the CEO. Yes, maybe the group chairman in the past used to carry the Tata name, but even then in the Tata history, there have been group chairmen who didn't carry the Tata name in between, and now surely not. So I think just the fact that, as you said, the fact that you can be CEO, that confidence allows people the ownership. And I remember this very interesting story that was told to us when we joined the Tata Group. Apparently, and I haven't seen this, at the entrance of Tata Steel, there's a huge board. There used to be, perhaps, which said "You are here," which was the GET position, and then there was a box set MD of the company, and then there were all these paths through which you could reach the MD. So every GET was told, you start here, but you could end up there, and you choose your path. But that's the ultimate goal for you. So I think just that probably creates ownership. Right? You will say, oh, okay,
Fantastic
I could want to be MD. So
fantastic story, and that's exactly it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
so if I may come in.
Yeah, Sandeep, come in.
No, I think this has been an absolutely fabulous conversation, and I would like to ask both of you had stellar careers, and I was not exaggerating in my introduction at all. One question before we wrap up. A lot of people, at least in my generation, not that you are the senior generation, but my generation, a lot of people have this question of, when do they really, a lot of people have great ideas in terms of entrepreneurs. When do they actually take that leap? When do they take that leap of faith? So, Srinivas, you have taken the leap of faith. Sudhir, you have taken the leap of faith inside the company. So what is your advice? What are those signals life should give you? It is time for me to pursue my own firm. I think this is a question a lot of people have on their minds, and we would love to hear your views on this.
Okay, so Sudhir, you want to go first?
Okay, San, you go first. You're the guy who's taken the leap here. I haven't taken the leap.
So I actually run a program called "How to Quit Your Job and Not Wait Too Long," right? So that's a 1 hour minimum conversation. But I think I have noticed two stages in which the taking the leap probably works. One is very early on in your career, just out of college, because you have the full energy, not too many obligations, family-wise, social-wise, and that's a great time, I think, to take a leap when you're completely unburdened by experience. I think there's some good opportunities and ideas over there. And second, I think I've seen a lot, and we have seen this in our own batch, that about 15 to 20 years after college is when the second wave of entrepreneurship ideation comes up. Usually by then you've established some credibility, you've got some financial security, and now you're kind of being bugged to do something different. But when should you do it? I think in reality you should do it whenever you feel strong enough about the idea. I would urge people not to quit and become entrepreneurs because they're pissed off with their current jobs. That's not a great time to become an entrepreneur. I think you should become an entrepreneur if you believe in something which is better than what you're currently doing. That would be my advice.
No, I mean, I don't have much to add to what Kisan said. I think that, from my friends who are entrepreneurs, both from HUL and who've left and who are not from HUL, I think there are two kind of profiles. One is, I feel that there is a bit of an entrepreneurial profile. There are a bunch of guys who just want to do it by themselves and, who just have their entrepreneurial bug, and they can be anywhere. The second is definitely what Kisan said, right or wrong, a lot of people become entrepreneurs because they're pissed off with what they're doing. I mean, probably the wrong answer. Maybe that's one of the reasons why companies like HUL and Tata's may not produce as many entrepreneurs as they should, because generally people are quite happy. In fact, there was a headhunter who came to me and said, "Yeah, what is this? Why are these guys, we're paying them 1.5, 2 times, and why are they not leaving levers?" So I said they're happy doing what they're doing. So you don't leave things when you're happy, right? So I think these are the two things. And so in big companies, you keep people happy. I mean, the job of big company is is to keep the entrepreneurs within the company, right? That's our job. I mean, and you can give them satisfaction and happiness. And if you keep them happy and keep them motivated, they're entrepreneurs within the company. That's it.
Well, that's absolutely fabulous to hear. The only other question people will want to know is how to get into Unilever or how to get into the Tata Group. But I'm sure there are enough Google articles to answer that. But I'd like to thank Srinivas and Sudhir. That was an absolutely fabulous session, and I'm sure our audience learned a supreme amount from that session. Thank you, Sudhir. I must compliment you on your choice of background. I think you're in a staycation. If that is your hope, you are a very, very rich man. So, but I'm assuming that's the staycation. So anyway, thank you. Thank you.
See you guys. See you, Sandeep. See you, Kisan.
Thank you.